happened when I drew this Vintage Mermaid. It was a challenge. In this video, I share the 7 steps of my process and how I overcame a reoccurring stumbling block. Why a mermaid? Because participating in art challenges is in the top 10 list of ways to grow your drawing skills. And this month we have Mermay. Why a vintage mermaid? I'll get to that. My objective with this project was twofold. First, in alignment with my main learning goal of becoming a masterful pen and ink illustrator, this would be an opportunity to practice drawing a character rather than my usual subjects. I ink with a dip pen, so I wanted to achieve a vintage look because majority of the pen and ink masters that I tend to study are from the turn of the 20th century. And second, to get over a major stumbling block. We'll get more into that later. Let's dive into the process. Research and gathering relevant references. Ladies from the early 1900s, some fish, mermaid artwork, pen masters, vignettes, botanical motifs, some wildflowers. Next, I sketched the thumbnails to explore potential compositions. I also played with different facial expressions. Once I had a suitable mermaid pose, I did a couple of subject studies with a fine liner pen. Some of it was tracing and some was freehand. The purpose of this step is to determine the line treatment, such as the hierarchy of details and values, carefully preparing the placement of marks before I put dip pen to paper. I view this preparation as a safeguard from potential mishaps at the inking stage. I was really attached to the vignette concept, super keen to create my own botanical motif. I've never drawn this style of fantasy ornament. I got stuck here. I backtracked, looking for additional references, and this zapped my energy. But rather than dwell on what wasn't working, I turned to nature for inspiration. Here's my struggle. Whether I'm pleased with my efforts or deflated by the outcome is largely determined by the thoughts I was thinking when creating the art. When I fixate on where I'm lacking as an illustrator, those negative perceptions towards my ability invade my mind. If, however, I focus on what I'm doing well or on how far I've come with my drawing skills, those high points give me courage to continue. The trigger is usually when I spend too much time gawking over masterworks. I fall into the trap of comparing. I get overly intense about how I think my art should look rather than embracing my progress. Back from my nature walk, re-energized, I immediately created a decorative motif, incorporated it into the mermaid drawing as the framing vignette. In this step of the process, I was still experimenting in my sketchbook, aiming to convey a sense of underwater movement in a surreal environment, using mark-making technique that resembles the old-time woodcuts or ink on clayboard. Then I proceeded to transfer the sketch onto the inking paper rather than redrawing it altogether. If you're familiar with smooth Bristol, you'll likely agree that it's best to keep the paper as pristine as possible for the ink application and aim to avoid excess marks on the surface. I used a regular ballpoint pen to trace the drawing for the graphite transfer, plus I tightened the design, adding some Easter eggs into the foliage. I was most nervous about the eyes, face, and hair, getting those right. I added a few pencil strokes where crucial details were missing from the graphite transfer. Then I used the smallest nib to ink the face and garlands adorning the sea maid's body. Again, I was eager for the section to come out a certain way. The pressure of great expectations led me to overwork this segment of the drawing. That was a red flag. I went for a break. I resumed inking, starting with the areas of the drawing where I felt most confident, such as the texture on the creature's tail and the organic elements. Continuing with the small nib in the first pass, then switching to a larger nib, increasing the line weights to suggest shadows or give an accented outline to elements that are closer to the viewer. I used contour lines to put emphasis on the elements in the forefront of the picture plane, but wanted to control the values in a lighter tone for the decorative elements of the background. I left out the contour lines there, and in turn, I used angles and line direction changes to suggest different surfaces and textures. Once the ink was dry, I removed the remaining excess graphite. For the finishing touches, I punctuated the focal point with black accents for hints of contrast against those white areas. The final step is to self-assess for learning purposes. However, to end this process on a high note, I treated myself to an unveiling ceremony. Thank you so much for staying until this point. I love sharing my passion for pen and ink. Your approach likely varies from the 7 steps that I showed in this video, though perhaps my stumbling moments were possibly relatable. If you enjoyed this video, let me know what you liked about it, and I'd also be happy to read your strategies for how you overcome low moments in your creative process, or otherwise suggestions on other topics you'd like to see me cover on this channel. As always, resources are listed in the description, and happy Mermay!